Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I like to discuss the Conservative MPs breaking ranks, so to speak, in order to speak out against the corruption tainting their party as the floodgates open to reveal the sheer scale of the problem to the general public. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, with some of the examples of corruption we've seen, you could view it as an unintended consequence of our political system. It's very easy. It's a very easy step for an MP to convince themselves that they're just making a few quid on the side, but that the country's benefiting, that the work they're doing is in the national interest. Indeed, Owen Paterson felt he'd done nothing wrong. That's what he thought. The companies benefiting from his advocacy were providing something that we needed. You know, the fact that, say, Randox, the biggest beneficiary of his work, did not provide what was required seemed to be neither here nor there to him. You know, in his mind, right, well, the country's having this emergency. We need these services. This company can deliver them. I'm making a load of money, you know, sure, but we do need these services. But then they didn't deliver them because they weren't the right company to do it. You know, but you know, in his head, there was a genuine issue. And if he could help out and earn a little bit on the side, what harm was there? This is how some of these MPs are thinking. At the moment, it's Conservative MPs. You know, let's not be party political about this. There have been situations where Labour MPs have done this. Never seems to be on the scale of Conservative MPs, but still. But that sort of corruption could exist under any government, and indeed has. You know, like I say, it's much more likely under a Conservative government, and indeed the numbers absolutely back that up. But it is a problem with having insufficient scrutiny over these matters by a media more interested in distracting the public than on focusing our attention onto what our government is actually up to. Because a lot of these cases of corruption, you know, some of them, okay, weren't known about. Some of them, they were absolutely out there in public. You know, MPs are moaning because, well, I declared it all. What was the problem? The problem was they did declare it. What media should have done was to have looked. The reason to declare it is so the media can look at it and go, that's corrupt. Their corruption was out in plain view because the media weren't looking at it and going, that's corrupt. But some of the corruption we've seen, and I've discussed earlier in the week, is not just a feature of our political system at all. It genuinely would not have occurred under either a Labour government or even previous Conservative governments. It's a built-in feature of the way the Conservatives have been operating ever since David Cameron became Prime Minister in 2010. But not all Conservative MPs are going along with it. It's been quite interesting over the last week to observe the split between the traditional Tory MPs who want it all brushed under the carpet because, you know, they've had their own snouts in the trough, and the more recent Tory MPs who want it stopped. A great example was Mark Fletcher, one of the so-called Red Wall Tory MPs. In fact, the one who displaced a bit of a Labour legend in Dennis Skinner in 2019. So for those who don't know, very famously, stood up in Parliament one day and said that half the Tory members opposite were a bunch of crooks. Unparliamentary language, not allowed to do that. Can't accuse members of the House of such things, even when it's true. So the Speaker urged Skinner to retract the statement. OK, he said, half the Tory members opposite aren't crooks. The phrase may or may not have been true then, but we're certainly getting the impression that it might be now. But Mark Fletcher, his Tory replacement, stood up in Parliament this week to say that he had no problem voting for the report, which concluded that Owen Paterson broke the rules and should be suspended. And he would do so again. Actually, I think a lot of them would do so again. He referred to the fact that some older Tory members consider the 2019 crop to be inexperienced and naive, because there's been a little bit of a split between the two groups. And absolutely true in most cases. This is the fact of it. See, a lot of these now Tory MPs did not expect to win those seats. If you were an ambitious MP hopeful, say, in whether the Labour or the Conservatives, what you don't do is live in a safe seat for the other party. If you're a Conservative and you aspire to enter in Parliament, you don't live in a Labour area. How insane would that be? So these are people who were Conservatives and, you know, they used to put themselves forward, and that'd be nice, knock on door stuff. wear a nice rosette, get themselves in the papers, but they didn't expect to win. And most of them seemed completely unprepared because this was not part of some plan of theirs. But Fletcher retorted that 2 years was long enough to know the difference between right and wrong. And what you see is an interesting split between the new and the old guard within the Conservative Parliamentary Party. Many of the more experienced MPs are either mired in these accusations of sleaze themselves, but not all of them are. But the ones who are not are probably on very friendly terms with those who are. So it's a bit like covering up for your mates. They're either defending themselves or their friends. But the new intake are much less likely to have been involved in cases like this and are much less likely to be close to people who are. And there's another dimension as well. Just as many of these new MPs did not expect to win, neither can they take for granted that they will retain their seat at the next general election. In fact, every single one of them will have a fight on their hands. But it is likely that they would wish to hold on to that seat. An MP in a safe Tory seat can expect to win their seat even if they back a corrupt colleague or are even accused of corruption themselves, as long as they can brush it off. News of their behaviour can cost them some votes, sure, but it will not cost them their seat. If they're routinely getting 3 times as many votes as their main challenger, you can afford to lose some votes and you'll still win. Many of these new MPs won by a few hundred votes. Even Fletcher, who won by about 5,000, won them in an area that had voted Labour for decades. They are in the habit of voting Labour. They actively changed their mind just this once. Their instinct changed consciously. They could easily regret the decision and go back to voting Labour again at the next election. You know, there's no such thing for these MPs as acceptable political damage. There's no such thing as, oh yeah, you might lose some votes. I can't afford to lose any votes, they'll be saying. Any issue that sparks an outrage in their constituency has the power to unseat them. Being in a seat that you cannot take for granted keeps an MP a little bit honest. Just a little bit. But bear in mind that these MPs are not going to go along with Johnson's undemocratic nonsense if it means losing their seat. And there are a lot of them. Johnson won the election not by massively increasing the number of votes compared to 2017, when Theresa May lost the Tory majority. He only got 300,000 more votes. He won it with careful targeting of seats. You know, it was an absolutely brilliant campaign from a strategic point of view. He won a lot of seats by a relatively small margin. The upshot of that is you have over 100 Conservative MPs who genuinely fear for their electoral chances if the party is seen to be corrupt. Unless they can apparently deal with, but not corrupt. They need to demonstrate that they're not corrupt. You know, I'd already spoken before about how a bunch of these Red Wall Conservatives harangued Owen Paterson and slated the Chief Whip Mark Spencer over the affair. They're spitting feathers over this. Then we had another interesting development. Andrew Bowie. Not one of the 2019 crop, but relatively new. I think he was 2017, was he? Relatively new anyway. A Scottish Conservative MP, and he's seen as a rising star of the Tory party. I don't know a lot about him, but he was vice chair of the party. So quite senior for someone quite new into it, until he stepped down a few days ago. Earlier this week, he stepped down from that role. He is the first Tory MP to step down from his role, not because he's implicating the scandals, he isn't, but because he is calling out the behaviour. It's a protest resignation. He's the first one to step down in protest at what the government are doing. Now, I'm a cynical old bugger. Comes from paying too much attention to politics. There are different ways of reading this. The way Mr. Bowie would want it read is that he's outraged by what has gone on and wants no part of this scandal. Fair enough. But why did he not resign before it became such a big public issue? I mean, if the corruption was the reason, not the fallout, why not resign when the vote was held? And then I thought, I'll have a little look at this, you know. He's saying he's outraged at the handling of this and then the way the government's done this and trying to shield Owen Paterson has damaged the party and is absolutely outrageous. And I thought to myself, does that mean he didn't vote then for the government's motion? I had a little look. Oh, he did. He voted to scrap the Standards Committee and just to save Owen Paterson himself. I'm afraid my theory at this point is that this resignation is less virtuous and more practical. This is a rising Tory star, we are told. So he hasn't made it to the big time yet, but he expects to. He's eyeing up a long political future. It's very early on. He's not thinking about retiring anytime soon. What if he thinks that the current Tory regime has its days numbered and he wants to make sure that his fingerprints are nowhere near it? What if he thinks that the Conservatives that follow this mess will have to disown Boris Johnson? I don't mean the one, if Boris Johnson's removed his immediate replacement, but some regime in the not too distant future. Very unusual. See, you see Labour apologising all the time for their past leaders. It's almost like whenever Labour lose a general election, the party can't wait to disown them. But not so much the Conservatives. They don't do that. But if the belief is that Johnson has gone too far and that the Conservatives will find themselves in the foreseeable future being unable to engage with the public without disowning Johnson, then does this explain the move? Hibernate for now while Johnson's fiasco burns itself out, then step up when it's all over and the party has to go through a period of introspection to rediscover itself. Could be. I certainly think it's probable. It's a bit like Rory Stewart, another political rising star who never tied himself to Johnson in the first place. He saw what was coming, in fact openly opposed him. He will no doubt wish to return when the party is prepared to reattach itself to the human race. And it's been said all my life that Europe is the issue that divides the Conservatives. See, Brexit was supposed to be the solution to that. Just leave and then nobody can argue about it. Well, in fact, I think this will also divide the party again. But for now, it is a unifying topic. But it seems that it has been replaced. Corruption may now be the topic that divides Conservatives. Between the MPs in the safe seats in the shires, and potentially those mired in corruption themselves, and those in the cities and industrial north who cannot afford the whiff of sleaze come election time. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.